What's up, Wizards? It's Dev, SVMTG. We like it a magic, and I got one more Lost Caverns of Ixalan preview video for you. That's right, we have reached the end, which means that we hit the common and uncommon dump today, where we got like 40 plus cards just dropped on our heads. Most of them not good, as opposed to what we've seen for the majority of previous season, good cards. So I was kind of shocked today to, there are bad cards in this set, but despite that, there are still about twice as many cards from the last day to talk about as there usually are. Often I sift through these and I pick kind of a top 10, like most impactful cards from the common dump. But today I was able to find 20 cards that I actually wanted to talk about. So it's going to be like a normal preview day with a bunch of cool cards. So let's go ahead and get to it. There's no time to waste. This is going to be kind of a sort of makeshift top 20 list in a way, so I guess we got to start small here and look at the limited viable stuff first, like we usually do. What's really different than normal? Let's look at Hotfoot Gnome, Ancestor's Aid, and Tinker's Tote first. Now, Hotfoot Gnome doing a little Reckless Stormseeker impression, but it is, of course, worse. You may notice if you're reading it already. It's 3 mana, 2 and a red for a 3/1 artifact creature, which is also a gnome. It has haste, and you can tap it to give another target creature haste until end of turn. I guess anytime a card reminds you of Reckless Stormseeker, you should probably at least point it out, especially when all the other cards from the day are like pretty awful. So this kind of stood out to me a little bit, and it's especially going to do some work in Limited, where I think tapping to give a creature haste, big freaking deal, especially if it works its way into like a dinosaur deck or two here and there. That's going to be kind of impactful, but I guess it's also an artifact. Reckless Stormseeker's not an artifact, but it's obviously worse than that card. So I'm not sure it sees too much standard play, but it is a pretty cool thing to be able to do. Well, let's keep it pushing here and look at another sneakily good little red piece for Limited here. It's Ancestor's Aid. 2 mana, 1 and a red for an instant. Target creature gets +2/+0 and gains first strike till end of turn. And then you create a treasure token, which is the interesting part, right? We've seen this combat trick a lot. I feel like it's been printed on like 8 different cards. They keep reprinting the same couple over and over, but it's always 1 mana for this. In this case, you got to pay double for it, but it pays you back immediately, and in fact, ramps you. I don't think this actually sees too much standard play or anything like that, but anytime you see a combat trick that ramps you, you kind of have to respect it a little bit and imagine some of the possibilities. There are decks in standard right now that might actually just care about an artifact coming into play. Extra little bonus, right? So I, again, am not sure it actually ventures too far into standard, but in Limited, again, cool little combat trick, right? You're probably going to play a copy of this in your aggressive deck. Tinker's Tote is, first of all, very cool. It's a cool name for a card. The art is great, but also it's kind of an interesting read, too. It's 3 mana, 2 and a white for an artifact. When it enters the battlefield, create 2 1/1 colorless gnome artifact creature tokens. You can also pay 1 white and sack it to gain 3 life. Okay, so I've been thinking about this card a good bit today, even though I don't think it's anywhere near the best card of the day. I mean, it's here at the start of the video, but I do kind of like this. You got a Yoshin Dissident in play. That's 3 +1/+1 counters, Hoss. It seems kind of all right. You know, you want to sacrifice all 3 of these things to Bartholomew? You absolutely can, kid. That's going to be 3 +1/+1 counters too. So I don't know. It's got its uses, especially in its own Limited environment, right? But I don't know, man. The going rate on 2 1/1 tokens is often 2 mana, but in this case, you also get an artifact that's like kind of like a food token a little bit, right? So you can sack it for 3 life. It's cheaper than a food token to sack for 3 life for what that's worth, right? You can like play it in life gain decks, I guess. You know, I'm really kind of stretching here, I get that, but there's a lot of cool things about this. You know, 3 artifacts all come into play at the same time, and then one of them breaks really easily, so that's a descend count right there. I guess, I mean, there's like a bunch of stuff that this does. You can bargain any of these 3 things away because 2 are tokens and 1's an artifact, so like, okay, you know, I actually think that this has a good amount of like versatility in the current standard environment. 3 mana probably prices it out of seeing play, especially compared to some of the other things you can do for 3 mana, right? But I don't know, there's just something about it. I like it. I would say it's totes cool, but no one ever actually used the word totes. No one I ever knew in my real life. Don't let them make you think that totes was ever actually a thing in the cultural zeitgeist, because no one I knew outside of like media that I watched ever used that word. They tried to make it a thing. It never was. It sounds cringe. No one used it. So I will not in fact say that it's totes cool. So let's move on to Eaten by Piranhas, as well as Deathcat Marionette and Sage of Days. Eaten by Piranhas just kind of gets a flavor win for me. I liked it in the world of Magic. If you're eaten by piranhas, you're still a 1/1 skeleton. That's actually kind of hilarious. But the actual card, what does it do? It's 2 mana, 1 and a blue for an aura that enchants a creature, and it has flash. Big deal on this one. Enchanted creature loses all abilities and is a black skeleton creature with base power and toughness 1/1. So little cursed roll token kind of thing here, which is kind of nice, except it makes the creature a skeleton, which is hilarious. Just again, flavor wins everywhere. Whoever designed this card, you did a great job. But it's also like kind of good. You know, you can play it during a combat step. It has flash. So, like, your opponent swings in with their big old buster, and then you block it up, make it a 1/1, Dunsky. So, that feels kind of nice. This has flash, and that kind of changes the game. You know, I like a little witness protection every now and again. I tend to be, like, kind of a fan of these blue removal spells. So, I like this. They gave it flash. It's like 2 mana blue removal so long as you have a blocker. And even if you don't have a blocker, it's just like, okay, the guy's a 1/1 now. That's pretty good too. So like instant speed, like Frogify that lasts forever or whatever. Yeah, okay, it's just awesome. I know there's other cards that aren't Frogify that do this. There are better examples, but I'm just always going to say Frogify given the chance. So don't mind me. But anyway, yeah, bottom line, I think this card's actually really sweet. Deathcap Marionette is the exact kind of card that excites me and not a whole lot of other people. It's 2 mana, 1 and a black for a 1/1 fungus with Death Touch. And when it ETBs, you may mill 2 cards. Just mill yourself 2. Awesome. Sweet. Very, pretty decent, actually. I think this has a chance of like making it into the Lurgoyf deck that I've brought up in literally every spoiler video. You're probably done hearing me talk about it at this point. I wouldn't blame you, but that deck is picking up the pieces, baby. So yeah, I don't know, man. This actually seems sweet. You could just play Undead Butler. It mills you more cards, but it ain't got the Death Touch. And I actually think having like a little dude in the early game with Death Touch might be a big gain for a deck like Lurgoyf's right now. So I don't know. I got my eye on it. I'm going to test it out in the Lurgoyf deck in the first like week of standard, see what happens. Maybe we'll get a deck tech together, but ultimately I don't have the highest hopes for it. But I like a 1 mana, or I like a 1 mana 1/1 Death Touch a lot. I'm a big fan of the Typhoid Rats and stuff. But a 2 mana 1/1 Death Touch, I will even take that, especially if it does the thing my deck wants to do, and this does. So cool ETB trigger. Not sure that it's better than some of the other 2-drops that deck could play, but I'm going to try it. Speaking of creatures for Sultai Lurgoyfs, here's Sage of Days. 3 mana, 2 and a blue for a 3/2 human wizard. And when it ETBs, you look at the top 3 cards of your library. You may put one of those cards back on top of your library, put the rest into your graveyard. So that's kind of interesting. You can just mill 3 off of this, I guess, if you want to. It gives you the ability to do that, but I wish that it put one of the cards in your hand. I think it would be an actual good Magic card if it did that. But even putting one of the cards back on top is sweet. You have to sequence things so that you don't mill yourself again after you put the card back on top, unless, of course, that's what you want. But one way or the other, I think a dude that like mills you when it comes into play, it can mill you up to 3, maybe put an important thing on top of your library so you draw it next turn to actually get the good cards in your Lurgoyf deck. That's kind of hard to do some of the time, right? So I don't know. I think it might have a small, tiny chance, not as much as the 1/1 Death Touch guy we just looked at, but I do like it. And as far as limited goes, this like helps with your descend count. Let's go a little. So, you know, it does cool things there. And it's got a decent power toughness in terms of like trading with stuff in combat and limited too. So I think it's a card you want to look out for there. And I don't think it does much in standard despite what I said. So let's clear it and look at some more cards, why don't we? Got a bunch of them to look at today. So let's check out Oaken Siren, Runaway Boulder, and Sunshot Militia. Now, Oaken Siren is 2 mana. It's 1 and a blue for a 1/2 artifact creature, which is also a Siren Pirate. Neat. How'd that happen? Anyway, it's got flying and vigilance, and you can tap it to add a blue mana, but you can spend the mana only to cast artifact spells or activate abilities of artifact sources. This little guy stood out to me, man. He's got 2 keyword abilities. He can attack and tap for ramp on the same turn, and yeah, he only ramps for artifacts and stuff, but so we've seen these blue rampers before. This thing's not exactly a revelation, right? I mean, we've seen blue guys that tap for casting spells and only spells, and we've seen a couple, I believe, of blue dudes in history that tap to cast artifacts, but not like a bunch. So this dude is not necessarily the rarest breed, but we don't see him all the time anymore. So it's pretty cool to have just another 2 mana ramper in standard for artifacts. We've got a few of them at this point. I freaked out about the last one I saw. I'm gonna freak out about this one a little bit, you know? 2 mana rock in standard that's also a flying vigilance guy. Yeah, I'll take that all day. This dude definitely stood out. Runaway Boulder is next, if only for the reference, if nothing else. I'm just glad this is a Magic card now. Apparently they're not going to do a Indiana Jones Universes Beyond or Secret Lair. I guess when they do, they'll just reskin this. You know what I mean? They don't even have to change the name, really. But anyway, Runaway Boulder is 6 mana for an artifact that has Flash. When Runaway Boulder enters the battlefield, it deals 6 damage to target creature an opponent controls, but you can also cycle it for just 2 mana. Okay, you know, it's not a meteor golem or anything, but it is pretty sweet, you know. It's a little colorless removal spell. I think that in Sealed you might play a copy of this in your pre-release or whatever, but there are going to be artifact decks in Commander that actually take a look at this. The Flash is a bit of a big deal. I actually think the Flash is kind of one of the best things about this card, but if you know it's going to be like 12 turns before you get to the mana, you play this thing, just cycle it away, you know. Cycling 2 is also great. This could even end up in like the Zenith Flare deck in like Pioneer or whatever, but that's not necessarily going to happen, but it definitely could. It's one of the better looking cards with cycling that I've seen in a minute. So I actually think this thing has some legs on it, you know, in the exact right like artifact ramp deck in Standard that's mostly colorless. This is a removal spell, and I've played worse cards in my life, I hate to admit. So I get to be a little bit excited about this, and again, if nothing else, the reference, man, it's got to be in the video somewhere. But Sunshot Militia, this caught my eye too with the possibilities. This is 2 mana, 1 and a red for a 1/3 human soldier. Tap 2 untapped artifacts and or creatures you control to have Militia deal 1 damage to each opponent. You can activate this only as a sorcery. So you don't know it, but there was an extended cut there where I had to finally hunt down the card this reminded me of because I just could not remember what it was called. It's Giriper Ether Grid, but it's not quite Giriper Ether Grid. Ether Grid can target any target, but it only taps artifacts. This is 1 less mana than Ether Grid, a little bit more brittle in terms of how many cards can kill it and all that, but still, 1 less mana, it's a good discount, and you get to also tap creatures. So seems a little disgusting. I feel like there's probably tons of just infinite combos with this and like Intruder Alarm or some nonsense, right? So that seems pretty cool. Just polish a game off that way in Commander, but one way or the other, I do like the ability to just kind of like slam folks by tapping down a bunch of artifacts and creatures. They did water this down a little bit because you can only activate it as a sorcery, which is butts, just big old shaking booties, but not in the good way like you want. So I'm not a huge fan of that aspect of the card. You got to do all this on your turn, tap your guys, take your shields down, whatever. So that probably makes it mostly just limited playable, but it still says each opponent. So I would be a little fearful of this in Commander in terms of just like blowing up the whole table at one time. It could happen. I guess you could also play this with like Halo Fountain in Standard, but you're getting like really janky there, friend, which is not necessarily an admonishment. I like that about you. So keep doing what you're doing. These are good ideas. But anyway, let's move on to a few more cards. Let's look at Mephitic Draft. Let me pour you one of those, along with Swashbuckler's Whip and Buried Treasure. A Mephitic Draft is just kind of neat. It's 2 mana, 1 and a black for an artifact when it ETBs or when it's put into a graveyard from the battlefield. You draw a card and you lose a life. So 2 mana, draw a card, okay, and then you sacrifice it, draw a card too. It's going to cost you some life. I didn't mention that other than when I read it, but I don't know, who cares? Life is a big deal. We're playing black, who cares? So, you know, I guess like when it comes into play, you get a card. When you sag it to Bart, you get a card. Like all these are good things. So I just wanted to point out this card existed. It did look stronger than most of the cards today, but obviously it doesn't have much of a head on it. Now, Swashbuckler's Whip is also kind of neat, although the flavor is a bit confusing to me. It's just a single mana for an equipment that also equips for just a single mana. Okay. Equipped creature has reach. It also has 2 tap target artifact or creature, and it has 8 tap discover 10. Why? Why does a random like Pirate's Whip, it's not even legendary, lead to the biggest discover value in the set? That doesn't. How does that make sense? Like, I guess, okay, pirates discover things because they sail on ships, but like, what's the whip doing? It's bugging me. It is bugging me. Why discover 10? But it's still, you know, whatever. It doesn't give the creature any like power toughness bonuses, which is a little whatevs, man. But I guess It is like really cheap to cast. It's really cheap to get on there. It at least gives them reach, which does make some sort of flavor sense, I guess, if the whip is long enough. But, letting them tap down stuff, like make your own tap a guy in limited, that seems pretty cool too. It's a 1 mana artifact. You probably got something for that to do. So altogether, it's pretty sweet. And then if you do get to the late game or you ramp up to 8 mana and sealed or whatever it is, then suddenly discover 10 every turn. You're probably going to be doing okay with that, kids. So I don't know. It's a neat card, but just again, the flavor is bothering me a little bit, but good card. Well designed, I guess. If the flavor is bothering me, then is it really well designed? I'm sure a bunch of people in the comment section will have like mental gymnastics justifications for why a whip can discover 10, but I'm not seeing it, man. So let's check out Buried Treasure next. This is 2 mana. It's an artifact. It's a treasure. You sacrifice it to add a mana of any color, you see, because it's a treasure. But also, you can pay 5 and exile it from your graveyard to discover 5. So finding buried treasure is discover 5, but a whip is discover 10. I'm sorry, I'm dwelling on it too much. Let's actually look at this. 2 mana for a treasure isn't actually very good. We've had cards like this before. I thought Mimic might actually do a thing. It did nothing. Somebody called me out in the comments of that video, like, Mimic is really bad. And I was like, we'll wait and see. It's really bad. So you were right on that one. Point to the comment section. So I guess back then I freaked out that Mimic was just like, it's 2 mana. This is a 2 mana rock in standard. I'm not going to make that same mistake, although it is. It is a 2 mana rock in standard that wants to go into your graveyard. Once it's in your graveyard, it's actually really cool, man. Like if you mill this into your yard, it has a use, and I always like cards like that. Even though it's kind of 7 mana for Discover 5, it's actually 6 mana for Discover 5 because the treasure gave you a mana, right? It's like, okay, and you can kind of pay for its own ability with itself. Like you sacrifice it that turn, you get the mana, and then you kind of only have to pay 4, right? Because you got the mana that it made is floating in your pool, so you really only need 4 to Discover 5 at that point. And like, okay, like we're getting somewhere, right? There's definitely applications, but again, I've talked about it for way too long, then I talked about it for like a full minute after that, so let's move on. But we're about to get into stuff that I think is actually kind of good. You can make a real argument for, so let's do that. Let's look at some caves, man. Captivating Cave and Volatile Fault are our last couple of caves of the set. Captivating Cave is a land. It's a cave. It taps for colorless and does not enter the battlefield tapped. So it's good right there, just if nothing else. You can also pay 1 and tap it to add a mana of any color, a little bit of filtering. You can pay 4 and tap it and sacrifice it to put 2 +1/+1 counters on target creature. Activate only as a sorcery. It also has really, really sweet art. I just want to point that out. Good job. But anyway, this goes into your graveyard. It forces itself into your graveyard, which is kind of nice because it'll still count for all the other like cave effects that care about caves in play and in your yard. Kind of think that's cool. And, 4 mana is a lot. It's really 5 mana because you have to tap it too, and you sack it, so you come down on like mana. It's kind of bad, but like, when you do want it, it's there for you. 2 +1/+1 counters is nothing to sneeze at. And again, the filtering's cool. If nothing else, though, comes into play untapped. We needed as many of those caves as we could, and we're getting a bunch of them. Like we're getting this like Field of Ruin-ish cave, sort of, with a very important difference between it and Field of Ruin. So don't let that make you think it's amazing or anything. But Volatile Fault does exist. It's a cave that taps for a colorless and also enters the battlefield untapped. So again, that's important. But you can pay 1 and tap it and sacrifice it to destroy target non-basic land an opponent controls. That player may search their library for a basic land card, put it onto the battlefield, and then shuffle. You create a treasure token. So normally this would be completely symmetrical on cards like Field of Ruin and the other stuff that we've seen like it. You go and get something too, right? You go and get a basic land as well as they. But in this case, you get a treasure token, which is actually good and bad, right? You're only going to use it the one time, but an artifact came into play. You can do stuff with that artifact that's artifact specific. You can't do that with stuff like Field of Ruin. This also fixes your mana. You can get whatever mana you want. So like maybe you don't, with Field of Ruin, maybe you don't have basic lands in your deck. That's another reason that this is kind of in some ways better than Field and cards like it, is that if I build with Field of Ruin, I have to have basics in my deck, or I have to have like more than 2, right? So I don't draw them and then I can't use them. You know what I mean? Can't search for them when the time comes. So with this though, you don't have to have basics in your deck, which is actually kind of amazing in some ways in terms of deck building with cards like this. So, you know, Treasure Token is probably worse than Basic Land a lot of the time, but there are definitely ways to make it better. So I think it's sweet. This also goes into your graveyard and still gets counted for cave effects. I should point that out too. So it's not terrible or anything, but I think a lot of decks are just going to play Field of Ruin instead. But there are going to be a select few, including, of course, the cave decks, but there may be even more that want to play something like this instead. But up next, let's check out Armored Kincaller, Over the Edge, and Tithing Blade. Now, Armored Kincaller is 3 mana, it's 2 and a green, for a 3/3 dinosaur. When it enters the battlefield, you may reveal a dinosaur card from your hand. If you do, or if you control another dinosaur, you gain 3 life. So this thing is going to just basically always gain you 3 life. You got one in play? You got one in your hand? No? Oh, geez. Why'd you even cast the thing then? Because it's a 3 mana 3/3. You know, like in limited, a 3 mana 3/3 is fairly stout. Even in standard, it's not the best stat line in the world, but this is really easy to cast. I feel like this won't be in the main deck of like Dinosaur Matters decks and stuff in standard, but if Dinosaurs is a deck in standard, I could see this tucking into the sideboard pretty nicely, because against decks like Mono Red and Soldiers and just aggro piles in general, this is a 3/3. It's going to trade in combat and brick wall completely a bunch of other stuff too. It's a reasonable cost to cast, and it's going to gain you 3 life back pretty much every time you cast it. In Dinosaurs, you got a dinosaur in your hand. You know, okay, they play with fire the first dinosaur, they lightning strike the second dinosaur. You still got a dinosaur in your hand to reveal when you play this. So 3 life is actually a pretty good little chunk against aggro, and you put a big old speed bump in the middle of the road when you play this card too. So I don't know, man. I think if Dinosaurs is real, this is going in the board. Now, of course, as we all know, Over the Hedge is a 2006 modern classic of cinema that we should all celebrate, whereas Over the Edge is a 2 mana green sorcery from this set. It has choose one, either destroy target artifact or enchantment, or target creature you control explores, and then it explores again. Just explores twice, which is kind of a neat little mode to have on your naturalized variant. This is sorcery speed, which makes it doo-doo. Okay, I get that, but it still stands out to me as a kind of disenchant at only 2 mana that can also do something if your opponent has no artifacts or enchantments in play, and I tend to really, really like those. So, again, I wanted to point it out. I'm not sure how much play it ends up seeing, but Explore Twice is actually a pretty good mode to have when you're empty on the other ones. Also wanted to make that Over the Hedge joke, but that's over now. Let's move on to the next thing. It is Tithing Blade. This is 2 mana, 1 and a black for an artifact. When it enters the battlefield, each opponent sacrifices a creature. You can also craft with a creature for 5 mana, 4 and a black. And then you get Consuming Sepulcher. This is an artifact. At the beginning of your upkeep, each opponent loses 1 life, and you gain 1 life. Everyone knows that has been on this channel more than a couple of years that I am an unashamed, although I should be ashamed, enormous fan of cards like Dogged Pursuit and Curse of Leeches and crap like that. Revenge of Ravens even I was a fan of. I still like Revenge of Ravens, actually. It's in my normal, quote-unquote, normal cube at the moment. So I like stuff like this. I can't help myself. And honestly, the front half of it, pretty fine. You know, we've never gotten a Dogged Pursuit that was on a removal spell, to the best of my knowledge or anything. So in this case, you get a little Edict effect, which again is sorcery speed. They're supposed to be instant speed. Everybody knows. Like, you trade a little bit of valuation, I guess. That is not the correct word in this case. For, you know, a little extra valuation. Again, not the whatever. I'll just keep using it that way. But yeah, you trade in value for value. Okay, you know, like, I don't care that it's not instant speed. I will play this gladly at sorcery speed with the knowledge that at some point in the game, I'm going to have a Dogged Pursuit. I don't know. It's not even good. Honestly, I want to just a quick disclaimer. That's why I said I should be ashamed. These are not good cards. Dogged Pursuit and Curse of Leeches, they're not good. They're so bad. Very bad cards. So awful. But I'm just a big fan, so I get to be a big fan of this. But if anything, if nothing else, which I say over and over, I'm just now realizing it's probably the 8th time I've said that in this video. But if nothing else, okay, a lot of those cards in this set, you get an Edict effect for just two mana. I was going to say $2. Because a mana each mana is $1 apparently. That's the conversion rate. But anyway, 2 mana. Edict effect, sure. If nothing else ever happens with it in the history of time, at least you got your removal spell, right? But eventually, putting a clock on them, it's a crappy little clock, but it's a clock, you know? I'll take that. So, that's a lot of words to just say that I like the card. But here we are, everybody. We've made it to the top 3 cards of the day, and all of these are cards that I think might actually be seriously good. We've been taking slight steps up in quality the entire time. I said there'd be a big step up in quality back there, but none of the cards that we've looked at in this video so far are anywhere near as playable as the last three we're going to look at. So let's start with Goblin Tomb Raider, old Lara over here. This is a single red mana for a 1/2 Gobbo pirate, and as long as you control an artifact, Goblin Tomb Raider gets +1/+0 and has a haste. Okay, so a little 1 mana 2/2 haster here. Let's get him. I kind of like it, man. You like Voldar and Epicure turn 1, you get in turn 2 with 2/2 haster, like, you know. Okay, and like maybe in Goblin decks, maybe in Pirate decks. I mean, both relevant creature types. That's kind of important to point out. In older formats, you can get an artifact on the table on turn 1 and still cast this. So that's kind of neat. At that point, it's only a 2/2 haste, but a 2/2 haste on turn 1 is really, really good in just about any environment. So this pushes a lot of damage, especially in older formats that can engineer just plunking an artifact down without losing too much value. And you know which formats I'm talking about. So I got kind of high hopes for this in a bunch of different places, and Standard might be one of them too. Just not too hard to get an artifact into play. We've seen a bunch of them that provide artifacts for ancillary value, just like it's nothing, like candy passing out on Halloween. I only got 3 trick-or-treaters this year. They're actually passing out more candy than I did on Halloween in this set with all of the freaking tokens. And really, you just go back through the last like 5 sets, they're just throwing tokens around like it's nothing, man. They're just making it rain with the food tokens and the treasure tokens and stuff. So this card could actually be active on turn 2 in a bunch of different ways than just Standard alone. But again, I think it goes way farther back. And it's also, I don't know if you caught this, but it's also, for some reason, a common. It's pauper playable. That's they really wanted to be playable in every format, literally. But we'll move on to Family Reunion here at, I guess, number 2. Can we get like a drum roll? Brrr, brrr. Here's a Family Reunion, number 2. This is a 2 mana, 1 and a white for an instant. Choose one of these. Creatures you control get +1/+1 till end of turn, or creatures you control gain hexproof until end of turn. Ooh, okay, so a lot of times these protection spells, especially ones that protect one target, which this is gonna do like 9 times out of 10, cost 1 mana. This costs 2, but it also has like an overrun, like a mini overrun mode on it. You know, you're casting Charge from the original Dominaria. Well, where is that? What set was that from? I don't know. My Rolodex isn't that strong. But anyway, +1/+1 to all your guys. Actually kind of sweet at instant speed, not only when used as an offensive combat trick, but even when used as a defensive combat trick. This can really throw a bunch of math off and just like wreck your opponent's board state, so look out for that too. But even if you have to use it as, you know, basically a counter spell against a removal piece, like that's fine too. You know, 2 mana is a good cost for this. I know that it's one more than we're used to paying for protection spells, even in white at this point in history, but you know, we haven't played Valorous Stance in a minute, have we? Is this better than Valorous Stance? Probably not, but in just the right deck, you know, super aggro-oriented white decks, and what do we have, like 5 of those in Standard right now? 2 of them are actually good. This could be a great piece. Now, you might think my number 1 card is Grasping Shadows, the 4 mana black enchantment that's sort of got a twist on Exalted, gives a creature Death Touch and Lifelink when it attacks alone, gets a counter, and then if there are 3 counters on this thing, you transform it into Shadow's Lair. It's a land that taps for black. You can also play a black and tap it to remove a dread counter from the Shadow's Lair, and you draw a card and you lose a life, and that seems pretty good. Right? You're drawing cards with a land is but it takes way too long, costs 4 mana. Could be a little bit better. Maybe it's commander playable. It's not my favorite card of the day. My favorite card of the day is actually a lowly 1-drop. It is still in black though. You guys know how much. It's just always going to be my favorite color. There's nothing I can do about that. It's Greedy Freebooter. This thing, guys, just a single black mana for a 1/1 human pirate. When it dies, scry 1 and create a treasure token. It ain't shambling gas, but I'm a fan of it fast. You're not going to be able to knock out any creatures with this, but sometimes that was the worst part of Shambling Ghast, although other times it was the best part of Shambling Ghast. Just hold them off for like 3 whole turns while you play your Loth. Okay, Shambling Ghast was a really, really good Magic card, and hopefully I'm not like misjudging this because it isn't Shambling Ghast, but it really wants to be sacrificed, right? It pays you back for its own mana cost in full the moment you sack it, and it even gives you a scry, like, hey, why why don't you just have a free scry, pal? Okay. And like the decks that'll play a card like this really want the scry too. You know, I have said a couple of times this previous season that what we needed, what these aristocrats decks needed in Orzhov the most was just like a 1-drop that wants to die. It has a couple in standard, but not like the best ones, you know? But now, not only did we get Market Gnome, which that was my number 1 card of that day, freaked out about it endlessly. You guys know how much I like that card. Still do. I think it might be slightly better than this, but one way or the other, this ramps you when it dies. It doesn't just pay you back its mana cost. It is doing that, yes, but it's also putting an extra mana source on the table for nothing just because it died, which is nutso, you know? We don't have Deadly Dispute in this standard, so that's another way that it's not going to seem as good as a Shambling Ghast. Because, you know, Shambling Ghast plus Deadly Dispute, you get 2 treasure tokens. It's literally the most disgusting thing you've ever seen in a game of Magic. This isn't going to do that in standard at the very least. I feel like it might actually take the place of Shambling Ghast and a bunch of other decks in like Pioneer and stuff that still do the Deadly Dispute Shambling Ghast thing, because a scry is going to be better for your game plan a lot of the time than -1/-1 is. It's kind of a decision, and it depends on how aggro heavy the format is, but I'm getting way too ahead of myself. Again, these aristocrats decks really want to scry because their draws are very important to them, and they usually don't get enough, especially in the early game where they're really looking for some draws. So help them do that. It's not going to draw any cards, but it's going to make sure, or at least help them draw the correct cards when they do get to draw. So I think that's important too. Just what a 1-drop, baby. Like, honestly, it says a lot about me as a Magic player, and you kind of know this about me if you've been watching for 8 years or 8 days, that like, it's a set full of like wacky cards. There's Contested Game Ball and like the thing that wants 1,000 counters, and like that's for some Magic players, and there's a bunch of amazing Commander cards in this set. Obviously that's for some Magic players. There's a bunch of giant 6-mana dinosaurs in the set that do absolutely bonkers stuff that I can't wait to play with. There's one that you can discard for removal and then reanimate it later. Like, the dinosaurs in the set are off the chain. The things that I like the most in the set are like the 1-mana dorks, because that is me. I think that it's weird that in a set full of those huge things, they went out of their way to give us some really, really good value 1-drops here, especially ones that want to be sacrificed. So, I got exactly what I wanted for Halloween. My Halloween wish this year opened up. The present, it was all in a bow with like a skull on it or something like that. I'm trying to paint a picture here. Open it up. This guy in Market Gnome jumped out. And Bartholomew was like presenting the gift. Bartholomew is Santa Claus in this example. Just really gave me just basically everything I wanted. And I never really expected that from Ixalan. You know, I thought, big dinosaurs. I'm going to do some merfolk. Sorry, merfolk people. You didn't really get enough of what you wanted, I think, to be honest. But still, I sure did, and this card is like way up on the list of things that I wanted. But that is Allski Kowalski for the whole preview season. Hey, will you do me one favor just for old time's sake, because I understand that a lot of you watch just for preview season and you don't come back until another preview season happens. So just do me like 3 favors or something like that before you get out of here this preview season. First of all, like the video. I guess that's 1. I get 3 wishes, right? Like the video before you get out of here. And then subscribe if you haven't done that yet. I actually noticed the other day that it looks like people are subscribing for preview season and then unsubscribing when preview season's over. Stop, cut it out. Like, just stay subscribe and stay subscribed. I see why you're doing that. But stop. This is actually when preview season gets good. So the last thing I want you to do is stick around and watch a couple of more videos, man. We got the top 10 sleepers coming out soon. Top 25 cards. I'm going to get on stream this weekend, Saturday, Sunday. I haven't really decided yet. Saturday would literally be tomorrow night. So very likely Sunday, getting on the streams. And doing, reviewing every single card in the entire set and assigning some sort of number grade to it. Something I put myself through for you. So make sure you're there on Twitch, or you just hang out and you watch the YouTube VOD of it. Aside from that, I'm going to be doing the Mono Black Halloween queue very, very soon. Yeah, I know we're in November. I don't care. I do not, if Halloween lasts the entire year. So we're doing that as kind of a holiday special coming up very soon. Stay subbed for that. And aside from that, there's going to be deck techs. Thanks for just sticking around for the extended pitch. That's my 4th wish, is that you haven't clicked away from the video yet and you're actually here watching me do the self-promotion stuff that I'm not even very good at. So I appreciate you. If you appreciate me for making this content, that makes me feel good, but I just appreciate you for watching it because, I need that. So like, thanks for sticking around. We're done looking at cards. You could have left by now, and I hate to remind you of that fact because you probably just clicked away. Is your girlfriend sitting on the couch next to you like, this guy's never going to stop talking, is he? Jeez, Louise. But I love you. Anyway, that's basically all I got. So like, do all the YouTube stuff. Check out the Twitch. Follow over there. If you have an Amazon Prime subscription, it is free to sub to one person. Make it me, please. Aside from that, you can check out the Patreon, $1 a month, and now's a good time to sign up because we are going to be doing a poll in the next few days to determine our first deck tech of, why did I say it that way? Our first deck tech of the season. So just $1 a month to get to voting over there, and it helps the channel a lot. I am finally actually done. A lot of time between It's Allski, Kowalski, and That's Itsky Lewitsky, but I think we finally made it to That's Itsky Lewitsky. Love you guys. I'm Deb from the place. Just let me know how you felt about all the stuff down there, and I'll catch you cats later. I'm Deb from the place. I'm just going to get stuck in a loop, aren't I? I'll catch you cats later. Thanks for watching, Wizards. Spread love and be kind.